The air still reeked of plasma, charred metal, and bad decisions as Brian Steele stalked through what remained of Forward Command Post Delta. Smoke curled lazily from the skeletons of mechs and bunkers, and the occasional groan of twisted steel was the only music left in this symphony of destruction. Brian stepped over what used to be a combat drone, now nothing more than a smoldering pile of regret. His boots crunched against spent shells and scorched ground. He adjusted the strap of his Mark 7 plasma rifle, because even in this hellscape, at least some things were still reliable. The power cell hummed warmly against his shoulder, a small comfort in a field full of corpses, static, and bitter silence. The 23rd Marine Combat Division was gone. Not just reduced. Gone. If the numbers on his tactical display were anything to believe, and they rarely lied about bad news, he was the only survivor. Which, to be fair, was about par for the course when your commanding officers insisted you hold the line against a swarm of Drachnids armed with superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior body odor. Hell of a party, Brian muttered under his breath, adjusting his collar like a man strolling into a bar fight he hadn't planned on winning. His HUD flickered uselessly. Most of the comms and sensors had been fried in the last Drachnid push. The few signals left were nothing but ghosts. He moved forward on instinct. One step, then another, his boots carrying him through the battlefield like some grim parody of a parade. Occasionally he'd crouch to check a fallen squad mate, but they were all past saving. Plasma burns, shattered armor, limbs arranged at creative angles, standard issue, war souvenirs. Then came the sound that made him stop. Not the groan of steel, not the whine of cooling plasma, but the faintest whisper of breath. Through the haze ahead, partially buried under wreckage and ash, something moved. Brian dropped into a crouch. His rifle came up automatically, his finger poised just above the trigger. His enhanced eyes focused through the swirling dust. It was a figure, a female figure, collapsed beneath a slab of ruined alloy. Even through the grime and blood, she stood out like an oil slick on water. Silvery hair spilling over the ground like liquid metal, skin the color of storm clouds on a bad day, and what looked like ceremonial combat armor that had seen better centuries. Well, damn. A Larian. If you believe the recruitment posters, the Larians were supposed to be humanity's strongest allies in this never-ending bar brawl of a galaxy. Regal, elegant, deadly as hell, and about as interested in humans as cats were in laser pointers. They didn't just fight, they made warfare look like an art form. Every one of them was a living weapon wrapped in beauty and mystery, capable of turning Drachnid soldiers into paste while maintaining perfect posture. And this one was paralyzed. Her armor had been cracked open at the hip, and her legs lay twisted, pinned under debris. That phosphorescent lavender blood of theirs seeped into the dirt like molten starlight. As Brian approached, she blinked up at him, her storm-colored eyes fluttering open just long enough to pin him in place with an expression that screamed equal parts fury and exhaustion. "Don't move," Brian ordered, already scanning her with his wrist med scanner. "Name's Brian Steele, Earth Marine Corps." She coughed, a surprisingly delicate sound, considering the circumstances. "Kira Banis," she managed, her voice carrying that melodic Larian accent that made even war declarations sound like bedtime stories. "Third Strike Force. Can't feel my legs." "Yeah," Brian confirmed grimly. His scanner displayed a neat red line through where her spine should have been intact. "Not good. Not fixable here. And certainly not fixable when enemy patrols could drop on them any second. According to protocol, strict, bloodless, logical protocol, he was supposed to leave her. Immobile casualties were to be left behind if they risked mission integrity. That was the cold calculus of survival. She seemed to know it too. "Just leave me," she said flatly, reading his expression like it was printed on his forehead. "Others may still be alive. Save yourself." Brian looked at her, really looked, then looked back at his HUD, still static, still blank, still promising nothing but a lonely death if he kept playing hero. Then he looked at her again, and then he laughed. "Like hell," he said, shouldering his rifle and already kneeling to clear the debris. That ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Stubborn human," she murmured. "You haven't seen stubborn yet, sweetheart." Piece by piece, he freed her from the rubble. Beneath the grime and blood, her armor was clearly more advanced than his own, stitched with self-repairing fibers, latticed with alien alloys, and only slightly revealing in that way that screamed form over function. This might hurt, he warned, sliding his arms beneath her to lift. I've had worse, she replied through gritted teeth, then winced, though perhaps not recently. Brian grinned, despite himself. Hold tight. We're about to make an extremely unauthorized withdrawal from this party. As he stood, her body settled against his, light in weight thanks to his enhanced muscles, but radiating an aura of quiet fury and pain. He slung her over his shoulder like a victorious hunter carrying home a prize, though she retained just enough dignity to glare at him for it. You know, she murmured against his neck, your heart rate is remarkably steady for someone carrying dead weight through a war zone. That's Marine training for you, he replied, then added with a smirk, and you're the most attractive cargo I've ever hauled. No contest. Her soft chuckle surprised him, sending a shiver down his spine despite the gunfire still echoing faintly in the distance. Flirting while evading death. How delightfully human, she murmured. What can I say? I'm a multitasker. He darted between wrecked mechs and collapsed walls, scanning constantly for hostiles. You have any insights on Drachnid patrol patterns? He asked as he pressed them both into the shadow of a smoking barricade. They hunt in triangular formations, she whispered. The visible ones are bait. The flankers are the real threat. Noted. She shifted slightly, pressing closer against him as she tried to get a better view of their surroundings. Focus, Marine, he muttered to himself. Got any other tricks up that stylish combat suit of yours? Several, she said slyly. Though I'm curious what made you notice my outfit in particular. Professional interest, he shot back. The tactical advantages of your armor design are striking. Of course, she purred. Just as I'm admiring the practical utility of your combat gear. Very utilitarian. Before he could deliver another quip, the distinctive whine of Drachnid energy weapons charging up cut the air. Brian dove behind a fallen pillar, twisting his body to shield her as bolts of sizzling plasma tore through where they'd been standing. Well, this is cozy, she remarked dryly, her face now mere inches from his. Comfortable? He asked, already calculating possible escape routes. Quite, though I prefer my intimate encounters with less plasma fire. Noted for future reference, he replied with a crooked grin. Peeking out, he counted 5 hostiles moving in. Suggestions? He asked. Her eyes lit up with something more dangerous than fear, gleeful tactical calculation. Their armor has a weak spot between shoulder and neck. One shot there and boom. I like the way you think, he said, already adjusting his aim. A single shot later, and one Drachnid's armor blew apart, taking 2 more with it. Impressive shooting, she murmured, her admiration barely disguised. Impressive intel, he countered. We make a good team. As he pressed forward, weaving through the battlefield with her in his arms and banter on his tongue, Brian Steele decided something important. He didn't care what the rules said. The rules hadn't survived this war. He had, and so had she. And he'd be damned if he let the galaxy tell him that was an accident. By the time Brian kicked open the bent, smoking door of what used to be a Larian transport, he already knew he was committing at least 4 kinds of court-martial offenses. First, he'd abandoned his post. Second, he'd ignored direct protocol by rescuing a casualty instead of retreating. Third, he'd shot several enemy combatants while technically outside the chain of command. And now he was breaking into a sacred alien healing chamber without permission, carrying a paralyzed royal warrior princess who definitely deserved better than his dirty human hands all over her. Frankly, this was shaping up to be the best date he'd ever had. The wreckage of the transport glowed faintly, bathed in emergency lights that flickered in wounded shades of blue and green. The air smelled like burnt circuitry and ozone, which, Brian figured, was still better than Drachnid breath. He adjusted his grip on Kira as he stepped over shattered beams and twisted hull panels, her silver hair catching the faint light like liquid mercury. Are you sure about this? He asked over his shoulder. Because I get the sense your people have opinions about who gets to use their fancy medical toys. Kira clutched at his armor weakly, but managed to let out a dry laugh anyway. They do, which is why you should expect consequences. I'm already dead on paper. But one more bad decision. She exhaled in a way that could almost pass for a laugh if you squinted at it sideways. They reached what must have once been the ship's medical bay. Somehow, through all the chaos, the Larian heel pod stood intact in the center of the room, humming faintly like it knew it was better than everything around it. It wasn't just advanced, it was beautiful. A gleaming crystalline structure that pulsed with soft light, almost alive in the way it responded to Brian's approach. Well, he muttered, setting Kira down gently at its base, this doesn't look like standard Alliance issue. It isn't, she said, her storm gray eyes watching him from where she lay. This is sacred. Among my people, using this pod with another creates a bond that cannot be undone. Brian straightened, cocking an eyebrow. You're saying it comes with strings attached? Her lips curved into the faintest smirk despite her pain. More than strings. Chains, perhaps. It aligns the bodies, merges the essence. Among us, it is more binding than marriage. Brian snorted. Well, lucky for you, I'm terrible at commitment. Her laugh this time was faint but genuine. And yet, here you are. Yeah, don't remind me. He ran his hands over the surface of the pod, feeling it respond to his touch with a warm glow. This thing's still functional? Yes. But, Brian, yeah? You don't understand what you're agreeing to. Oh, I understand just fine, he replied, meeting her gaze evenly. You're saying I climb in there with you, you get healed, and then suddenly we're space married. Sounds like a hell of a honeymoon to me. Her laugh was pained but musical. Humans, always turning solemn rites into jokes. Lady, you've clearly never been to an Earth wedding. He helped her up, bracing her as she half stood, then half collapsed into the waiting pod. The crystalline surface shifted around her like water, supporting her body and pulling her inside as though she belonged there. When he started to step back, her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. You still have time to back out, she said quietly. Not a chance. Even if this changes you forever? Already changed, he said with a grin. Met you, didn't I? She blinked at him for a beat, then shook her head with that same faint smirk. You are insufferable. Yup. Now scoot over. Bride's on the left, right? Her eyes rolled, but she made room anyway. Brian climbed in beside her, the pod closing around them with a low hum and a sudden rush of light. For a heartbeat, he thought he might have been incinerated. Then the sensation settled into something stranger, warm, liquid, alive, like sunlight and fire and static electricity all rolled into one and poured through his veins. He could feel her, not just physically, though yes, very much that too, but mentally, emotionally. Everything that was Kira Banis unfolded before him like a battlefield map. Her pain, her pride, her fury at her own weakness, her admiration for his refusal to leave her, even her grudging attraction to him despite his general lack of manners and polish. In return, she felt his protectiveness, his determination, his bone-deep stubbornness, and, to her apparent shock, his respect for her as more than just a beautiful warrior in distress. It was intimate in ways that made kissing look like a handshake. He opened his eyes when had he closed them, to find her face inches from his. Her storm-gray eyes now shimmered with flecks of his brown, and he realized, vaguely, that his skin tingled everywhere they touched. Well, he said hoarsely, that was educational. Her breath hitched. I can feel my legs, she whispered, wonder thick in her voice. And I can feel you, he said, try not to sound entirely awestruck by the fact that their thoughts were still bleeding into each other. Your mind is loud, she murmured. You're welcome, he shot back with a grin. Then, slowly, she sat up, her movements tentative but smooth, as though their bodies somehow already knew what the other was going to do. You've been healed, he said unnecessarily. Yes, she confirmed, flexing her fingers before resting one hand on his chest. But so have you. This bond, it has changed us both. Brian flexed his fingers experimentally. His body felt faster, stronger, sharper, like he could count the heartbeats of the enemy soldiers sneaking up on them 2 decks below. You feel that too? He asked. I do, she said, her eyes narrowing as though testing her own senses. We're synchronized. He arched an eyebrow at her. So what now? You want me to carry you over the threshold? Or are we skipping straight to the part where we kill more Drachnids? Her smirk turned positively feral. We kill more Drachnids. Brian grinned back, already drawing his rifle. Good answer. They stepped out of the pod together, moving in perfect lockstep without even thinking about it. Her silver hair brushed his cheek as she drew her twin energy blades, their glow now eerily in sync with the hum of his rifle. This feels different, she said quietly, spinning one of her blades in a lazy figure eight. Better, he corrected. You realize, she added dryly, that you've just entered into what my people consider a sacred union. You're now more bound to me than you are to your own command structure. Sweetheart, he replied, giving her an unabashed once-over, my command structure can suck it. That startled a laugh out of her, low and dangerous and darkly amused. You may regret this yet, she warned. Lady, he said, stepping closer so their shoulders brushed. I already don't regret it. And for the first time since the whole miserable war began, she smiled. Not the thin, brittle smile of a soldier on borrowed time. A real one, equal parts grateful and wicked. Well then, she said, flipping one blade and catching it neatly. Let's go show them what happens when you underestimate humans. You mean, he corrected as he chambered a fresh power cell. What happens when they underestimate us? They exchanged one last glance, wordless but charged, then moved as one toward the next fight, already carving out a legend no protocol could ever erase. It wasn't until Kira grabbed Brian's hand mid-fight and pressed it to her abdomen that he realized something had gone sideways. Well, more sideways than usual. Her storm gray eyes, now flecked with bits of his brown thanks to that whole unauthorized space marriage they did in the heel pod, stared into his with an expression he couldn't quite parse. Worry? Awe? Murders resolve? All three. Probably all three. He was about to ask if she was hurt when she said, very calmly, Brian, I'm pregnant. He blinked. Oh. Okay. Wait. What? The pause between oh and what was heroic, in his opinion. Most men would have panicked immediately, but not Brian Steele. No, sir. He needed a good solid 2 seconds of disbelief first. Yes, she said, unbothered by his sputtering. The bond, the chamber, it accelerated the process. Rapid compatibility. The child is already growing. Brian glanced down at her stomach, which looked exactly the same as it had before. Flat, armored, and way too good for him. That was like 30 minutes ago. Larian biology, she said matter-of-factly, combined with your stubborn human genetics. Uh-huh. He gave a shaky laugh. So, how accelerated are we talking? 9 months? 9 weeks? 9 minutes? Unknown, she admitted, which did absolutely nothing for his nerves. Before he could find something clever to say, and he would have, given another second, his HUD flared with hostile signatures converging on their position. Well, at least the galaxy wasn't going to give him time to process. Right? He muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. We'll talk about this later, sweetheart. For now, you and Junior keep your heads down. Kira tilted her chin at him with something infuriatingly close to amusement. You may find that unnecessary. And that was when things got weird. They dug into the collapsed medical bay, him firing through gaps in the wreckage, her slicing through anything that got too close with those gorgeous, glowing blades. When the first sign of something's very wrong showed up, the bunker's defense turrets roared to life, which would have been great, except no one had touched the controls. Brian risked a glance at the console. Dark, fried, dead, and yet the turrets tracked perfectly, blasting Drachnids out of the air with pinpoint precision. Kira? He asked slowly, ducking plasma fire. She tilted her head, her expression distant. It's the child, she murmured. Brian froze. Come again? Your human technology and our Larian systems. The child is merging them, rewriting the rules. You're telling me our unborn kid is running the defense grid? She nodded, distracted, and improving it, as if to prove her point One of the turrets pivoted, hit an incoming dropship with exactly the right angle of fire to collapse it onto 3 advancing squads. Brian let out a low whistle. Well, he said dryly, at least someone in this family's pulling their weight. It didn't stop there. As they fought their way deeper into the bunker, more systems came online. Lights, shields, even the ancient Larian relics embedded in the walls, all humming in eerie harmony. The human comm system, which he'd written off as fried beyond repair, crackled back to life and began relaying Drachnid true positions before Brian could even think to ask. Then came the data streams. His HUD lit up with information. Enemy weak points, projected movements, estimated casualties. All delivered in neat little icons that blinked with soft lavender and blue light. Not bad, he muttered. Kid's got better situational awareness than most lieutenants I've met. Kira allowed herself the faintest smirk. Takes after me. He grinned despite himself. That's so? Because I'm seeing an awful lot of human tactics in here too. Flanking maneuvers. Kill zones. Psychological warfare. She gave him a look that managed to be both superior and affectionate. And who do you think taught me those? Fair point. By the time they reached the central control room, the Drachnids were already starting to falter. You could see in the way they moved. Less coordinated, more hesitant, like they'd caught wind that something bigger and scarier was waiting for them down here. Brian kicked open the door and swept inside, his rifle up, Kira gliding in behind him like some beautiful, murderous shadow. What he saw stopped him cold. The central console was glowing, alive with intertwining streams of light. One distinctly human red, the other Larian silver. Together, they formed intricate patterns that pulsed in time with something. In the middle of it all was their child. Not physically, of course not, but he felt it. A presence in his mind, riding the bond between him and Kira, reaching outward into the technology like it had always belonged there. I don't know whether to be proud or terrified, he muttered. Both, Kira said softly. Appropriate for parenthood. He snorted. First kid to ever rewrite a war protocol in utero. Bet that'll look great on a resume. And then the Drachnids decided to make one last push. The entire bunker shook as a fresh wave of them crashed through the outer defenses. Brian could hear their claws scraping against the walls, the hiss of their weapons charging. Guess they're not impressed, he said grimly, shouldering his rifle. Oh, Kira murmured, her lips curving into a predator's smile. They will be. That was when the baby really showed off. The lights flared blinding white, and suddenly the bunker itself moved. Walls shifted, floors rotated, turrets emerged from impossible angles. Every piece of tech, human and Larian, fused into one seamless war machine, orchestrated like a symphony under the direction of an unborn conductor. Brian laughed. He couldn't help it. Look at this. He called over the roar of combat, dropping another Drachnid with a single shot. Look at what you made, kid. Through the bond, he felt the baby's reply, a pulse of pride and playfulness, like a tiny fist bump to his brain. The Drachnids broke. You could almost see the moment their hive mind snapped, their morale collapsing under the weight of what they were facing. Not just 2 warriors, but an entire bunker weaponized by the hybrid mind of their unborn enemy. The survivors fled, screeching into the night, leaving behind a trail of bodies and smoldering plasma burns. Brian stood there in the smoking ruin of the control room, grinning like a maniac, his rifle still hot in his hands. Well, he said at last, glancing at Kira. That was one hell of a gender reveal party. She arched an eyebrow at him. Human humor. Infuriating as ever. Admit it, he said, moving closer. You love it. Her lips quirked despite herself. Perhaps. And then she rested her hand lightly on her stomach, her eyes softening. The child, she said quietly, is extraordinary, even by Larian standards. No hybrid has ever done this before, or even been possible. Brian followed her gaze, his own expression turning serious. Yeah, he said softly, and now the galaxy knows it. They stood there a moment longer, the distant echoes of retreating Drachnids fading into silence. Brian finally broke it with a dry chuckle. Well, he said, On the bright side, at least our kids already got job security. Strategic weapon and technological savant? I hear that pays well. Kira shook her head, exasperated and amused all at once. You really are impossible. He grinned down at her. And yet, he murmured, resting a hand over hers on her stomach, you still picked me. Her storm-gray eyes, now flecked with his brown, met his, and her faint smile said everything words couldn't. Above them, the lights of the bunker pulsed gently, as though the child within was still listening, still playing, still rewriting the rules of a galaxy that had dared to underestimate them. And Brian Steele, for the first time in a long time, felt like maybe, just maybe, they were finally starting to win. By the time the first shuttle of brass touched down outside the bunker, Brian was already having second thoughts about not shooting them out of the sky. He and Kira stood side by side on the command deck, a pair of battle-worn newlyweds, bonded in ways no regulation manual had accounted for. Their unborn child quietly reprogramming the bunker's defenses in the background like it was solving a crossword puzzle. Let me guess, Brian muttered as he watched the delegation file in through the scorched blast doors. This is the part where they tell us we broke all the rules, endangered the mission, and created an unacceptable strategic risk to the Alliance? Kira didn't even glance at him, just smirked faintly as she brushed a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear. More or less, with additional condescension layered on top. You humans are very predictable when you're threatened. Don't sell your people short, he said dryly. I bet your matriarch is about to out-condescend the entire Navy. And indeed, here came the matriarch, clad in ceremonial battle armor that looked equal parts terrifying and impractical, striding into the room like she owned the planet. Behind her, the equally self-important Admiral Thompson of the Alliance Navy, his medals clinking softly as he glared at Brian like he was about to have him court-martialed on the spot. Sergeant Steele, Thompson began coldly. Admiral, Brian replied cheerfully. You're welcome. That earned him a twitch of the Admiral's eyebrow and a soft snort from Kira that she disguised as a cough. The matriarch swept her gaze over the command room, taking in the still glowing hybrid control console, the perfectly synchronized defense grids, and the walls that were humming faintly in what Brian now recognized as the baby's way of showing off. This is, the matriarch started, faltering ever so slightly as her eyes landed on Kira's stomach. Unprecedented. Thank you, Brian said brightly. It was not a compliment, she snapped back. Oh, don't worry. I'll take it anyway. Thompson stepped forward, planting his hands on the console like he owned the place. Your combat logs show impossible levels of integration between human and Larian technology. The defenses responded faster than any Alliance AI. The turrets anticipated enemy movements. Even our med bay was. He paused, clearly struggling with the next word. Cooperative. Explain yourself, Sergeant. Brian just crossed his arms and grinned. You're welcome, he repeated. Kira finally spoke, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. We don't answer to your protocols, or your expectations, or your fears. What you see here is the product of something neither of you could create in your labs. Trust, choice, and evolution. The matriarch's head snapped toward her. You speak as though this abomination is to be celebrated. Brian's grin vanished in an instant, replaced with the sort of cold, dangerous smile that made people regret every decision that led them here. You want to call my kid an abomination again, lady? Or are we done here? That earned him a long, appraising stare from the matriarch. She seemed to realize, a little too late, that Brian Steele was not bluffing. Before the room could devolve further into diplomatic chaos, the bunker's lights flared, and the hybrid console came alive. The baby was done waiting. Every system in the bunker synchronized at once. Human red and Larian silver merging into a pulsing gold that lit up the room. Holographic displays flickered to life around them, showing real-time feeds of Drachnid movements, casualty projections, enemy morale, and then something entirely unexpected, a stream of data that neither side had seen before. The baby was broadcasting the battle from its perspective. One by one, the officials turned to watch as the holograms depicted not just tactics and positions, but feelings. The The symphony of thought and instinct that guided the fight. It showed how human aggression and Larian precision complemented each other. It showed how two species that had spent decades mistrusting each other could become something greater than either alone. It was beautiful in a terrifying, battlefield kind of way. The matriarch stared at the display like it had personally slapped her. By the first light, she whispered, This is battle meditation, but integrated with human combat algorithms. And better than both, Kira added, her voice calm and sure. Thompson's jaw tightened. This wasn't authorized. Brian actually laughed at that, though there was no humor in it. Yeah, well, neither was winning. At that moment, alarms screamed to life. The bunker's perimeter sensors catching another Drachnid assault incoming. This time it was big, really big. Brian's HUD filled with red as the enemy's signatures stacked higher and higher. Well, he drawled, checking his rifle. Looks like they're mad. Good. I was starting to get bored. Kira's blades hummed to life beside him as she stepped forward, her storm gray eyes gleaming with unholy amusement. They're making the same mistake again, she murmured. They think we're just two soldiers. Oh no, Brian agreed, his grin returning as he rested a protective hand on her stomach. They're about to learn what happens when you mess with family. The officials tried to protest, of course. Stand down. The defensive grid can't handle. But the baby was already ahead of them. The walls shifted again, turrets rotating into impossible positions, shields thickening into luminous gold. Through the bond, Brian could feel their kid's focus sharpening, its little consciousness humming with joy as it wove human and Larian tech into something new and terrifying. The Drachnids stormed the outer hallways, hissing and firing wildly. They didn't last 10 seconds. Turrets coordinated perfectly. Energy barriers snapped into place at just the right angles to funnel them into kill zones, and the bunker itself seemed to breathe, alive with the baby's will. Brian and Kira moved in perfect sync through the chaos, firing, slicing, clearing rooms as fast as the enemy could enter them. He could feel Kira's delight through their bond as they danced together. Left flank, she thought. Already on it, he shot back, dropping 3 Drachnids before she even finished the thought. Their unborn child's presence in their minds pulsed warmly. Proud, please, protective. And the bunker responded in kind, striking at the invaders with frightening precision. When the dust settled, the hallways were littered with charred Drachnids, the air thick with smoke and ozone. Brian leaned against the console, wiping his brow and smirking at the stunned officials. You were saying something about protocol? He asked sweetly. Thompson was pale, but to his credit, still standing. This is impossible. No hybrid has ever. Yeah, Brian interrupted. You keep saying that. You want to say impossible one more time? I'll have the kid reprogram the fire suppression system to dump you outside. The matriarch stepped forward slowly, her ancient eyes fixed on Kira's stomach. This child, she began, her voice unsteady for the first time Brian had ever heard, is not just a hybrid. It is an evolution. A bridge. Brian clapped his hands together. Finally, somebody gets it. The baby, not content to let them finish their arguments, flared the lights one more time and initiated a final sequence. Every screen in the room lit up with new data, schematics of weapons, ships, defenses, all hybridized, all better than anything either species currently fielded. The future was staring them in the face, and it was wearing a diaper. As the officials stood there, flustered, awestruck, muttering to themselves, Brian slipped an arm around Kira's waist. Well, he murmured into her ear, think they finally get the point? They'd better, she replied, her lips curling into a wicked smile. Or we'll make it again. Through the bond, their baby pulsed in quiet agreement, its presence smug and satisfied as the bunker hummed contentedly around them. Brian couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Parents of the Year, he muttered to himself. Obviously, Kira replied, somehow managing to make it sound like a threat and a promise at the same time. And as the two of them stood there, filthy, bloody, victorious, with a bunker full of terrified admirals and flustered matriarchs staring at them like they were something dangerous and divine, Brian Steele finally understood something. In a galaxy full of rules, they hadn't just broken protocol. They'd rewritten it, and they weren't even done yet. 3 months later, Brian Steele was pacing a hospital hallway that cost more per square foot than his entire childhood neighborhood. The Human Larian Unity Medical Center gleamed like the inside of a jewel, all soft gold and silver light. Walls humming with hybrid technology that he had very mixed feelings about, because most of it seemed to be running on the same principle as his kid's personality, superior and a little smug. Through the walls, he could feel it, that quiet, familiar presence in the back of his mind, pulsing with curiosity, mischief, and the faint suggestion that he should sit the hell down and stop wearing a hole in the floor. Yeah, all right, kid. But still, combat, no problem. Facing down impossible odds, his specialty. But this? Waiting to meet the little galactic game-changer who is currently rewriting biology, warfare, diplomacy, and his definition of privacy? This had him sweating through his uniform. Kira was in a private suite at the end of the corridor, her door flanked by 2 ceremonial Larian guards and one very nervous human doctor who clearly didn't know what to do with himself. She'd insisted on a natural birth. Of course she had, because, as she'd said with that infuriating smirk, anything worth doing is worth doing the hard way, human. Her storm gray eyes, flecked permanently with his brown now, had glinted with equal parts pride and mischief when she'd added, "Besides, it will terrify the officials if we do it our way. Because why stop terrifying the galaxy now?" When Brian finally stepped inside, Kira was sitting on a bed that looked more like a throne, silver hair splayed around her like a queen in repose. She was radiant and dangerous even now, skin glowing faintly from the Larian, healing energies suffusing the room. "You look beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Her lips quirked. Flatterer, but noted. She held out a hand, and he took it, sinking into the chair beside her. Through the bond, he felt her confidence, her strength, and underneath, a small, sharp thread of nervousness that she tried to hide, which he, of course, teased mercilessly. "What, warrior princess scared of a baby?" he murmured. Her mental reply was pure steel wrapped in velvet. "Scared of what it will say to you, perhaps. It already judges you, you know." "Oh, no doubt," Brian said dryly. "Kid's been judging me since conception, just like its mother." Her laughter, low and musical, warmed the room. The birth itself wasn't like anything Brian had imagined. For one thing, it felt like their baby was running the room. He could feel its mind intertwined with theirs calmly, and perhaps a little smugly, directing the hybrid medtech to create optimal conditions for its own arrival. Machines whirred and glowed without anyone touching them. Holograms bloomed like flowers in midair, and the Larian healers and human doctors just kind of stayed out of the way. "Already giving orders," Brian muttered. "Like its father," Kira replied between breaths, her voice calm despite the sweat beading on her brow. "Excuse me? I'm great at following orders." Her look could have strip paint. "All right, fine," he conceded, "but you like that about me." Her laugh turned into a sharp inhale as the next contraction hit, and he winced in sympathy, and then gasped as he felt it too, through the bond. "Oh, good," he gritted out, clutching her hand. "Pain sharing. That's great. Love that. Thanks, kid." Considerate, educational, Kira managed her voice right even now. Hours passed in a blur of heat, pressure, and a strange electric joy that left Brian breathless and Kira glowing like a goddess of war and childbirth. And then, with a cry that seemed to resonate not just in the room, but through every wire, wall, and circuit in the hospital, their child arrived. A son, and he was perfect. The healers carefully placed him in Kira's arms, and Brian stared at him like the universe had just punched him in the chest. His skin was a faint lavender, but warmer than Larian tones, with undertones that matched Brian's. His silver hair shimmered with just enough brown to make it unique. And his eyes, when they finally opened, were a swirling mix of storm gray and earth brown, shot through with a faint, impossible gold. Kira's voice was soft but certain when she spoke. "Ares." Brian blinked. "We're naming him after a war god?" Kira turned to him, her eyes dancing. "You suggested it." "Fair." Through the bond, Brian could already feel the kid's mind. Sharp, curious, and impossibly calm for someone who'd been alive for about 5 minutes. "Well," Brian said softly, touching the boy's tiny hand, "you've got your mother's attitude already. And my winning personality." Kira snorted softly. "Let's hope he's more of a diplomat than either of us." As if in reply, the lights overhead flickered and a holographic projection shimmered into life. Battle schematics morphing into peace treaties, showing paths forward that neither humans nor Larians had ever envisioned. Brian raised an eyebrow at his son. "Show off." In the months since the bunker incident, as the Alliance had diplomatically dubbed it, things had started changing. The Alliance and the Larian matriarchy had stopped glaring at each other across conference tables and actually started building things together. Ships, weapons, even cities, all inspired by the hybrid systems their child had demonstrated. The Drachnids? They'd retreated so fast they left scorch marks. For the first time in decades, humanity and Larians weren't just allies of convenience. They were becoming something more. And Ares, who was sleeping peacefully now in his mother's arms, was the reason. Later, Brian stood at the window of their suite, watching the city glow beneath them. Towers of steel and crystal rising together in patterns his son had designed before he was even born. "You know," he said as Kira came to stand beside him, Ares cradled against her shoulder, "when I drag you out of that wreck, I figured we'd both die. Worst case, I'd go out looking like a hero. Best case, maybe I'd get a medal." Kira gave him a sly look. "And instead you got me." "And him." Brian grinned crookedly. "Yeah, not bad for a dumb Marine." Through the bond, Ares stirred sleepily and sent back the faint impression of approval and mild exasperation. Brian chuckled. "See? He already thinks I'm an idiot." Kira leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then he takes after both of us." When the joint delegation arrived later that week, again, to demand an explanation for how their newborn son had already begun reprogramming military satellites and accidentally improved the planetary weather grid, Brian just handed Ares over to Thompson and crossed his arms. "There you go," he said deadpan. "Explain it to him. Good luck." Ares yawned and reached out to tap the Admiral's chest with his tiny hand. The entire delegation's comms devices lit up at once, displaying a perfectly rendered simulation of a fully integrated human Larian fleet capable of wiping out a Drachnid armada in under 5 minutes. Thompson's face paled. "Right," Brian said cheerfully, taking his son back. "That's what I thought." That night, after the delegation slunk out of the room muttering about policy reviews and unprecedented developments, Brian and Kira sat together on the bed, their son nestled between them. "You realize," Brian murmured, tracing a finger over Ares' tiny lavender cheek, "he's already got more influence than most admirals." Kira smiled faintly. "And more sense." Brian leaned back, his grin lazy and satisfied. "So, first natural hybrid. First to merge our technologies. First to terrify both our governments into cooperating. And all before his first solid meal. That's got to be some kind of record." "Ambassador," Kira suggested softly. Brian snorted. "Please, think bigger." "Emperor." Their son stirred at that, sending a warm, amused pulse through the bond, as though acknowledging the title and filing it away for later consideration. Brian chuckled. "Fine," he said softly, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead. "Whatever you want to be, kid. Just don't forget who carried you through that war zone first." Kira smirked. "And who taught you how to wield a blade?" Brian glanced at her, his grin returning. "Parents of a year," he said again. "Obviously," she replied. And somewhere, deep in the circuitry of the hybrid city below, the lights pulsed softly, gold and silver, red and blue, as though the entire world had already started remaking itself in Ares' image. Because in a galaxy full of rules, he hadn't just broken them. He'd rewritten them, and he was just getting started.